Hey guys, this is Mrs. Krouse, and this is our second video about the Unit 8 Lesson 2 notes on blood types and sex-linked traits. And this video focuses on sex-linked traits. So we're going to skip past all the blood type stuff. Okay, and now we will begin with sex-linked traits. So thus far, all of the traits that we've looked at are controlled by genes that are found on autosomes, which remember are non-sex chromosomes. But we can also track the inheritance of traits that are found on the sex chromosomes. We call those sex-linked traits, and we could describe that pattern of inheritance as sex linkage. Okay. Now, we can look at traits that are controlled by genes found on the Y chromosome, but for the purposes of this class, we're going to look at traits found on the X chromosome, which are called X-linked traits. Now, we can have different alleles for the genes found on the X chromosome. For example, there's a disease called hemophilia that's controlled by a recessive allele on the X chromosome. And hemophilia causes you to have difficulty with blood clotting, so you could have a lot of bleeding resulting from just a minor cut. Nowadays, we have synthetic clotting factors that we can use to treat hemophilia patients so that the symptoms of their disease isn't as severe, or aren't as severe. We're going to use an X to represent the X chromosome and a little h superscript to represent the hemophilia allele. Again, we're using the X because it's on the X chromosome, and we're using a little h because the hemophilia allele is recessive to the normal allele. So the normal allele, we're going to give the abbreviation X with a big H because it's dominant. Okay, so here are the possible genotypes and phenotypes associated with this trait. So the first three genotypes will all result in a female baby because they all have two X chromosomes. And for the first two, the female is going to have normal blood clotting because she has at least one copy of the dominant normal allele, big H. Okay. Now this second female, though she will have normal blood clotting, is considered a carrier for that recessive hemophilia allele because she has one X little h, and she could pass it down to her children. This third female would have hemophilia because she has two of that recessive little h hemophilia allele. Okay, and then our last two possible genotypes will result in male offspring because males have an X chromosome and a Y chromosome. Notice that we don't show H superscripts on the Y because the hemophilia allele is not found on the Y chromosome. Okay. So this first male, he has an X with a big H, so that gives him normal blood clotting, and the second male has an X with a little h, so that results in hemophilia. Now, again, Y chromosome should not have big H or little h superscripts because they don't have the blood clotting gene on the Y chromosome. Now these traits, like hemophilia, are called X-linked recessive traits because they're controlled by a recessive allele on the X chromosome, and they happen to be more common in males than females. And that's because males only need to inherit one copy of that recessive allele, like we see with this genotype here, in order to show that recessive trait, which in this case is hemophilia. Females would need to inherit two copies of the recessive allele to show the recessive trait, and that's much more rare. Again, we call women who have a heterozygous genotype, so X big H, X little h carriers. So again, they don't have hemophilia because that recessive hemophilia allele is covered up by the normal dominant allele, but they can pass on the recessive hemophilia allele to their children. Okay. Now let's do a Punnett square problem. Let's say we have a man who does not have hemophilia and he marries a woman who's a carrier of the hemophilia allele. So we're going to do a Punnett square and figure out the phenotype frequencies in the offspring. Okay, so here we put the man who does not have hemophilia on the top of the Punnett square. We know he has to have a big H on his X chromosome because he does not show hemophilia. He's normal. And then this is the genotype for the mother. She's got a big H and a little h because she's a carrier. Then we're going to fill in our Punnett square. When we do this, we're always going to put big H's before little h's, and we're always going to put X chromosomes before Y chromosomes. We end up with 50% of our offspring being female. They have 2 X chromosomes, and they both have normal blood clotting because they have at least 1 big H. However, this possible daughter is a carrier of the hemophilia allele. 25% of our offspring are going to be male that are normal, so that would be this X big H Y baby. And then 25% are male with hemophilia, so that's this X little h y baby. Okay, moving on, let's talk about examples of X-linked dominant traits, which are controlled by a dominant allele on the X chromosome. An example of an X-linked dominant trait is the hereditary form of rickets, and rickets causes the bones to soften and weaken, and it can cause the leg bones to bow, which is one of the characteristic symptoms of rickets. So we are going to use an X big R to represent that dominant rickets allele, and we're also going to use X little r for the recessive normal allele. Okay, so let's say we have a man who has rickets and he's marrying a woman who does not have rickets. So we'll do a Punnett square for this and figure out our offspring phenotype frequencies. Okay, so here's our man who has rickets on the top of the Punnett square, and he has an X big R because big R represents the dominant rickets allele. The woman does not have rickets, so her genotype has to be X little r, X little r. Okay, when we fill in our Punnett square, 2 out of our 4 offspring, or 50%, are female, and they have at least 1 big R, so they have rickets, whereas our 2 male babies here and here are normal since they inherit the X little r normal allele. Now, one thing we notice in the Punnett square here is that a male who has an X-linked dominant disorder, like this father, he's always going to pass on that dominant allele to his daughters, okay? Because daughters are going to inherit 1 copy of the X chromosome from each parent. So if the dad has the trait, the daughters inherit the trait. However, he's not going to pass on the trait to his sons because the sons inherit their only X chromosome from their mom, and they inherit their Y chromosome from their father. So an X-linked dominant trait that's found in the father will not be found in the sons. All right, that's it for our sex-linked traits video. Thank you.